Welcome back, everybody, to the deep dive. And today we're diving deep into, a pretty significant development in global trade, China's zero-tariff policy for least developed countries.
hmm
And I found this fascinating when I first read about it. It seems like a really bold move from China.
It really is. It has the potential to really kind of shake things up in a good way, hopefully, in the global trade landscape.
But we're talking 100% of tariff lines for goods from these countries just entering China duty-free.
Yeah, 100%. It's pretty remarkable when you think about it.
So paint a picture for us. What,
Yeah.
what could this look like in practice?
Well, I mean, just imagine Rwandan coffee beans
Right.
landing in China without any of those usual import taxes.
Oh, yeah. I love Rwandan coffee.
Ethiopian textiles or even seafood from Mozambique. It really opens up a lot of possibilities for these countries to boost their economies.
It's got to be huge for their local industries, right?
Absolutely. Take Ethiopia's textile industry, for example. They're already a major player, but with this zero tariff policy, I mean, their exports could just explode. We could be talking about thousands of new jobs and a huge boost to their GDP.
So it's not just about like theoretical economic benefits. We're
Yeah.
talking about real tangible improvements in people's lives.
Exactly. And that's what makes this policy so exciting. It has the potential to make a real difference for people in these countries.
Okay. So we've got coffee, textiles, seafood. What else is on the table here? What other goods are we talking about with this zero tariff deal?
Well, it's a pretty diverse range of products. Agricultural goods are a big one. We're talking tea, cocoa, fruits, even honey. There's also a lot of focus on things like handicrafts, clothing, and a variety of manufactured goods.
So it sounds like it's not just about raw materials.
Right, exactly. It's about supporting a much wider range of industries in these countries, helping them develop and diversify their economies.
And you keep mentioning least developed countries. Can we maybe just define that a little bit for our listeners? What exactly does that mean?
Sure, so it's a designation used by the UN. Basically, these are countries with the lowest levels of socioeconomic development. They often face really significant challenges, things like poverty, limited infrastructure,
Yeah.
vulnerability to climate change, and so on.
So targeting them with a policy like this, that's a pretty big deal, right?
It is. I mean, while the EU has its everything but arms initiative, China's move is just much more comprehensive. It's a really strong signal of their commitment to supporting these nations and building those trade relationships.
But let's be realistic for a second. There have got to be some potential downsides to a policy this sweeping.
Right? Of course. There are always two sides to every coin. And one of the concerns that's been raised is making sure there's compliance, making sure the benefits are actually going to the legitimate, least developed countries and not being exploited by others.
Right. We want to make sure it's actually helping the people it's intended to help.
Exactly. And then there's the question of the impact on China itself.
Right. Yeah. I was just going to ask about that. Won't this influx of goods, potentially disrupt their own domestic markets?
That's a very valid point. China is going to have to manage this influx carefully. They don't want to flood their markets and undercut their own producers. So
Yeah.
finding that balance is going to be really key.
So it's a delicate balancing act for
Sure,
sure.
absolutely. It'll be interesting to see how it all plays out, but there's no doubt it's a fascinating development with the potential to really reshape the global trade landscape.
Okay. So lots to unpack here, but we're just getting started. We'll be right back after a quick break. So before the break, we're talking about some of the potential downsides and challenges of this policy. And I'm wondering, how about for the LDCs themselves? Is there a risk of them becoming too reliant on the Chinese market?
That's a really important point to consider. Yeah, I mean, ideally, this policy acts as a springboard, right? Helps them develop their industries, get stronger, and then eventually expand into other markets as well.
So it's not just about, China sort of propping them up. It's about empowering these countries to be competitive on a global scale.
Precisely. And that kind of brings us to another potential challenge, infrastructure.
Right.
Some LDCs, they might not have the ports, the roads, the transportation networks needed to really handle a significant increase in trade volume.
So even with zero tariffs, if the goods can't actually get out efficiently.
Yeah, you could end up with a bottleneck situation.
Exactly.
So investing in infrastructure is going to be absolutely crucial if these LDCs want to really capitalize on this opportunity.
So we've talked about some of the potential benefits and some of the challenges, but let's zoom out for a second. What's the bigger picture here? What do you think China's end game is with this policy?
Well, I mean, on one level, it's definitely an economic strategy. It's
Yeah.
a way for China to secure access to resources and new markets for their own goods and services. But it's also about more than just economics. I think it's fair to say this is also a geopolitical play. China is very strategically positioning itself as a champion for the developing world,
Right.
strengthening ties with these countries and, expanding its global influence.
And it all ties in with their Belt and Road Initiative, right?
Absolutely. I mean, that's the massive infrastructure project they've been pushing, building all those roads and ports and railways, connecting economies across Asia, Africa, and Europe.
So the zero tariff policy kind of fits right into that broader strategy.
It does. It's all interconnected. By fostering growth in these LDCs, China is essentially creating a network of partners who benefit from those infrastructural investments.
So it's like they're building a new Silk Road for the 21st century.
That's a great way to put it. And it raises another really interesting question. What if other major economies decide to follow suit?
Imagine if like the US or the EU implemented similar zero tariff policies.
Right. That could really shake things up.
Yeah.
You could see a kind of race to the top with everybody competing to offer the most favorable terms to LDCs.
Which on the surface sounds like a good thing for these countries, right? More options, more leverage.
In theory, yes. But there are always potential downsides, too. I mean, some experts have raised concerns about a potential race to the bottom,
Oh, yeah.
where countries might start lowering their environmental or labor standards just to try to attract investment.
That's a good point.
So it's really important to make sure that any moves toward this greater trade liberalization are done in a way that's sustainable and responsible, benefits everyone involved.
Okay, so lots to think about here. This zero tariff policy, it seems like just the tip of the iceberg, really. So many potential ripple effects we could be talking about here.
Absolutely. I mean, the immediate impact is one thing, increased exports, greater market access for these LDCs.
Right.
But the real story, I think, is about the potential for long-term economic transformation. And that's something that's going to take years to really unfold.
Yeah. We'll have to wait and see how it all plays out, but it's
Yeah.
definitely a story worth following.
For sure. This is one to keep an eye on. It has the potential to really reshape global trade as we know it.
It really does feel like we're just scratching the surface here. This zero tariff policy, it's almost like the first domino to fall.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to put it. And it'll be interesting to see, what kind of chain reaction this sets off.
Exactly. So before we wrap up here, I just want to make sure we've really distilled all this down for our listeners. What are the key takeaways here?
Sure. So, I mean, at the most basic level, China has implemented this really groundbreaking zero tariff policy for all least developed countries.
Right.
And that means a huge range of goods, from agriculture to textiles, manufactured goods. All of that can enter the Chinese market now completely duty-free.
Huge implications there.
Yeah, it's a big deal. And ultimately,
Yeah.
I think the goal here is to really stimulate the economies of these developing nations. Create jobs, hopefully lead to a better quality of life for millions of people.
And it's important to remember, this isn't just an act of charity from China.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. This is a strategic move on their part.
Mm-hmm.
They're aiming to secure access to resources,
Right.
expand their global influence, and really position themselves as a leader in promoting development.
Okay, so all that makes sense.
Yeah.
But of course, there are challenges ahead, right?
Oh, of course. I mean, one of the biggest is going to be ensuring compliance,
Mhm.
making sure that those benefits are actually going to the LDCs and not being exploited by others.
Right. So really making sure it's having the intended effect.
Exactly. And then there's the question of managing that influx of goods into China.
Right. Making sure it doesn't disrupt their own markets too much.
Right. And then, of course, there are the potential trade imbalances that could arise. And then also just helping these LDCs build the infrastructure they need to really take advantage of this opportunity.
Because even with zero tariffs, if you don't have the roads and the ports and all of that.
It's not going to matter.
Right. Exactly. So a lot of pieces have to fall into place.
Mm-hmm.
But the potential rewards, I mean, they seem enormous.
Right? Oh, they really do. I mean, this policy, if it works the way it's intended to, it could really reshape global trade patterns, strengthen relationships between developed and developing countries, and maybe even, contribute to a more equitable distribution of wealth globally.
That's a big hope. But it's an exciting one.
It is. It's definitely something worth striving for.
So the big question now is what happens next? If other major economies like the US or the EU, if they follow suit, what kind of world are we looking at?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? I mean, will this lead to a race to the top,
Mm-hmm.
where everyone's competing to offer the best terms to these developing countries? Or will it spark kind of a race to the bottom
Oh, I see.
where countries are cutting corners on things like environmental and labor standards
Yeah.
just to try to attract investment?
Right. Yeah. So a lot of potential paths this could take.
A lot of uncertainty. But I think one thing is for sure, this is a story with huge, far-reaching consequences. It's going to touch the lives of people all over the world, and it's something that we're going to keep following very closely right here on the Deep Dive.
Absolutely. This is definitely a story that's just getting started. So thanks for joining us, everyone.
Thanks for having me.
And we'll see you next time for another deep dive.